Okay, welcome to this guidance on writing the reflective narrative for your AYAC assessment. Just to clarify, the AYAC assessment consists of two components. Is the critical reflective narrative, which we're going to focus on today, and the interview. So the purpose of the entire assessment, which is both the narrative and the interview, is to ensure that you are ready to practice, so that you work safely, you're patient focused, you meet the sector standards, and that you demonstrate yourself as a lifelong learner who is able to self-regulate. So in terms of throughout both components, so the narrative and the interview, when we talk about sector standards, we're talking about these domains, so the good scientific practice domains. So we've got domain 1, which is about professional practice. So that's about patient-centred care, looking at the scope of your practice, as well as communication, the professional responsibilities that you'll undertake, and working with others. The second domain is about scientific practice, and that's about data and reporting, technical proficiency, and quality assurance. Domain 3 is about clinical practice. So that's about any clinical activity, clinical investigations, and therapeutics. Domain 4 is the research, development, and innovation part of the standards, and that looks at specifically around research, development, and innovation in relation to research activity and any service development that you've been involved in. And domain 5 is about clinical leadership. So that's about how you've developed yourself as a leader in healthcare science, and how you have demonstrated your abilities to lead others within your specialty. So as we're focusing on the narrative, we need to have a look at reflective practice. And just to explain what we mean by reflective practice, it is a process by which you look at your own professional practice and identify, where you're going well and what you've done well, but also areas that you need to improve and challenges that you've experienced and how you've overcome them. And there's different perceptions about what reflection and reflective practice is. There's different definitions that you will find and how it should be structured. But in essence, reflective practice is about learning. So having experiences, reviewing them, taking a step back and analysing them and learning from them, but taking that learning into future practice. So once we've learned from an experience, we can adapt our behaviours, adapt what we do in future situations based on what we learned from reflecting on previous ones. And this is what we're looking at through this reflective narrative. The reflective narrative itself, how we've described it, is a synthesised reflection, because you're looking at the completed evidence in your portfolio, analysing it against those 5 domains and discussing and evaluating what you have learnt in relation to those 5 domains, and providing evidence from your portfolio, so directly referencing your portfolio to demonstrate that you have met those 5 domains. And then you're going to reflect on any gaps in your knowledge and practice, and from that, identify any future development or action that you're going to take. As part of that future development or action element of it, you can include in your appendix an action plan if you feel it's appropriate, but it's not compulsory. But through the actual narrative, you have to show that you're being forward thinking, that you're saying how the experiences you have will and have influenced your future practice and development and what you might need in order to develop further. So in terms of you as a reflective practitioner, it's important then that you're not backward looking but forward thinking. You're looking to improve your own practice and you're demonstrating that through this reflective narrative, that you're self-aware and that you can critically analyse and evaluate your own practice, as well as drawing on feedback from others and taking a step back and using that to make more insightful reflections about your own practice and the evidence that you're presenting in your portfolio. And it's about you drawing conclusions and developing that new way of thinking and showing that you've evolved into this ready to practice healthcare scientist. So then, in terms of structuring this reflective narrative, usually when we think of reflection as taking place after a singular event. So we might have an experience, we take a step back after it and consider what happened and what learning we're going to take from it. But the AYAC is different. The AYAC is this synthesized reflection where you're looking at your learning and your evidence in your portfolio as a whole. And the skill that you're going to demonstrate is about how you've met each of the 5 good scientific practice domains and linking your learning to concrete evidence in your portfolio. And the assessors, when they come to assess your narrative, will only look at the evidence that you reference to in your portfolio. So you need to make sure that what the evidence that you're presenting actually is the best evidence to demonstrate that you've achieved that domain. Okay, so it's really important to remember that. They won't be looking at your whole portfolio. They're not there to reassess your portfolio and the evidence in it. They're there to actually look at the evidence that you're presenting and referencing within your narrative actually supports what you're discussing in that narrative. There are many models available for reflective practice. But we would say that many of those are not suitable for this AYAC reflective narrative because you're not reflecting on that singular event. So what we ask you to follow is the Driscoll model. It's based upon a model by someone called Borton. So you might have it's probably one that's very familiar to you. It's the what, so what, now what model of reflection. So basically, on the what side, you start with that, you describe, that's your description. Okay, so if you were doing it on a single experience, that would be where you describe the event, action, or experience. The so what part comes next, and that's where you review that experience and explain why that action or event was significant. And then finally, it's the now what. That shows that you have learned from the experience itself. So this is where you explain how you will use the information that you've learned from that experience to inform practice in the future. And that's what they're looking at in this synthesized reflection, which is your narrative for the AYAC. So to put that in other terms, to really link that back to your AYAC reflective narrative. So the what is going to be the description of the evidence from your portfolio, which demonstrates knowledge for each of the 5 good scientific practice domains. The so what is analysis of that evidence. So what does it prove? How do you feel about the evidence and the experiences? And what are the gaps in your knowledge? And the now what is what are you going to do about the gaps in your knowledge or practice? how are you going to develop your knowledge further? And you might include, as I've already mentioned, an action plan in your appendix for your narrative. So to explain this further, in the what, this is your descriptive piece. The so what is the reflective part. And the now what is the critical reflective bit, where you're going to show how that application of your knowledge will shape your future experiences. It will show how you use your knowledge to enhance your understanding of those experiences that you've had, and about how you're going to learn from these past experiences and assess your options and make decisions for the future and how you will improve. So the purpose of this reflective narrative, and the reason why I put this in, I mentioned it a couple of times, because it's really important to remember, have this in the back of your mind when you're writing, planning, writing, and writing your reflective narrative. That piece of writing, that reflective narrative, needs to instill you and your assessor with confidence that you have the ability to practice safely. It needs to demonstrate that you've got self-awareness, self-regulation, and self-development. So you recognise that at the end of this programme, you will be a qualified healthcare scientist, but that you also understand that learning doesn't stop at the end of this programme, that you will be continually learning. You're a lifelong learner. You recognise that as a practitioner, you're learning all the time, and that you need to be able to engage in self-development. And also, finally, the purpose of this reflective narrative is to demonstrate you're ready to register with the HCPC and uphold the standards expected of a healthcare scientist. And have these three things in the back of your mind all the time when you're writing this reflective narrative. It's so important to recognise that it's about you demonstrating that you're ready to practice, okay? So it needs to be evidence-based. So I've already mentioned this, but just to reiterate, it's about consolidating your learning. So bringing together everything that you've learned and for you to demonstrate that you are ready to practice against each of these 5 domains of good scientific practice. And you need to link what you're saying to evidence from your portfolio. And there's guidance on how to do that on the website, and I'll come to that in a minute. But, you know, it's a simple way of referencing the evidence in your portfolio. Basically, think about, can someone else find this if I reference it in this way? Is it easy to find if I reference it in this way? But we've got suggestions on how to do that on the website. And identifying yourself as a reflective practitioner by recognising your current stage of learning, so where you're at now, that what you've achieved and what you know, and what you recognise as your continuing developmental needs. So it might be that you've had some experience enough to demonstrate domain 5 about clinical leadership for the purposes of the STP, but you recognise that that's an area that you would like to develop further and give suggestions or examples of how you're going to do that in the near future. I've added this in here, and I don't want to dwell on it too much, but I think what's important for you to understand here is that feelings do come into to reflective practice. They are important to acknowledge because they can become a barrier to demonstrating good practice if we don't acknowledge how we felt about something. But it is important to take a step back from those initial feelings. So what we would say is, don't go, if something didn't go right and you want to mention that in your reflective narrative, it's not about blaming other people. It's about showing what learning you gained from that and how that will influence your future experiences. So rather than dwelling on, well, I didn't get enough experience of X, Y, and Z, and then saying, well, that was the fault of my department, then that could actually say to your assessor, well, actually, is this instilling confidence that they're ready to practice? They're saying they didn't get an opportunity to do this, and there's no plan of how they're going to fill that gap, then does that instill us with confidence? So your reflective narrative is not a place for you to sort of air grievances. It's about saying what you've achieved and how you can meet the good scientific practice domains. And that's really important to remember. So going back to this slide all the time, remembering these, having these in the back of your mind. Does this instill confidence in my assessor and myself that I'm ready to practice? Does it demonstrate that I have that self-awareness? And does it demonstrate that I'm ready to register with the HCPC and uphold their standards? Okay, so have that in the back of your mind all the time. It's important that you demonstrate that you plan how to develop any sort of gaps that you feel that you still have, and that you identify how these are going to be filled, and that they are confident that you're able to practice and you've got that readiness to practice. So passing the IACC. So those that pass read and follow the guidance. That will be clearly explained on the website. There's an area specifically for IACC guidance, and you will have been directed to that. So you will be able to find all the guidance that you need in order to, not only for the narrative, but for the interview part of the IACC too. And it's important that you read and understand that guidance. Those that pass use the submission template. So there's a template on that area of the website, quite clearly labelled the submission template for your reflective narrative. And those that pass use the marking criteria. And again, that will be available on that part of the website. And so you need to be familiar with that so you know what a pass looks like, you know what success looks like for completing that narrative. Those that pass produce a narrative which assesses their own practice, and it's important that it's based on your own practice. So you need to demonstrate throughout that you're patient and safety focused, okay? That you demonstrate the 5 good scientific practice domains, that you demonstrate your current abilities and suggest future improvements. And I will say it again, that it instills confidence in yourself and your assessor that you are ready to practice. Now, we've got a number of examples on the website of those that completed their IACC in 2021. So those, good examples. This is an extract from one, but again, look on the IACC part of the website, and it will clearly show under the reflective narrative part some examples there. Now, this is an extract out of one of the examples, and you can see here how they've referenced to their portfolio. Okay, so this will be in reference to a particular module, and where that can be found in terms of sections in their portfolio. Okay. It is important that you back up what you're saying with evidence from your portfolio, because that's what it relates back to. I'm not going to read this out. I'm going to use this as an example of how you can actually plan for your reflective narrative as well. But it follows the structure of what, so what, and now what, which I'll demonstrate in a minute. It also references clearly to their portfolio, the evidence to, where the assessor can find the evidence to back up what they are saying. It emphasises patient safety in there. It's related to the actual domain that's under discussion, the content is, and it's concise, logically written, and it gives a succinct overview, and that's really important. Just to say that this is an extract, a partial extract from Domain 1. So this isn't the entirety of Domain 1, and this is an extract from it. You can see the source of this one on our website as well. Okay. So I have split this up into the what, so what, and now what in terms of what this person has written. So it's what was that previous extract, but I've split it up into the what, so what, and now what. And you could almost do this with your own narrative. Don't submit it like this. Submit it in a narrative form like this is written. But this can enable you to make sure that you are being reflective, particularly this bit. This is the bit that the now what part of it is where people sometimes miss out, and that's where it can affect how the mark that you get, okay, or how it's assessed. So it's really important you do this forward thinking, this element of it as part of your narrative. But this can help you, doing it like this or in a similar way might help you plan out your narrative in advance, and to make sure, or as you go through your narrative and proofread it, you can say, right, I've done the what there, I've done the so what, I've done the now what, and you can keep looking at it in that way to make sure that you're double checking that you're doing each of the components to actually instill that confidence in your assessor that you're ready to practice, that you're consolidating that evidence, you're reviewing it, and you're looking forward and being forward thinking with it. In terms of planning your narrative, the template that we've referred to before, the submission template, you could use that to draft out, you can have a draft version where you're drafting it out on there as in order to plan your narrative as well. So, use the tools available to you to plan it out and to pick out the evidence that best demonstrates your readiness to practice linked to those 5 domains. So the reflective narrative needs to assess your own practice. It needs to encompass the entire STP training period and experience, and it needs to demonstrate that you understand your own accountability and self-awareness, so that you recognise that as an individual, you're accountable for your own practice and your own learning. So those that fail then won't be surprised that those that fail don't follow the guidelines, the template, and don't consider the marking criteria that we've mentioned already. I'll keep labouring it, but make sure that you look at the AYAC area of the website, look at the guidelines, look at what you need to do, keep revisiting the guidelines to make sure that you're meeting the requirements, and use that template and use the marking criteria to your advantage. And look at the examples, look at the good examples that we have put on from 2021, because they will show you how to formulate that narrative. Obviously, everybody's narrative will be different because everybody's had a different experience. So it's got to be based upon your own portfolio of evidence. Those that fail emphasise a descriptive narrative rather than one that is analytical, okay? So it needs to be critically reflective. Don't just focus on the what. You don't want the majority of your workout being made up of just describing what happened. What you want is the learning that has come from those experiences and how you're going to take that forward. Also, part of that is that you want to be emphasising that you are patient-centred and you can demonstrate safe practice. So those that fail tend to not be able to bring that across in either the narrative and or the interview. If you don't do as well in your narrative, there is opportunity to bring that narrative up in the interview, but you don't want to leave it to chance. So the more you can emphasize the analytical aspects of your learning, the better. Those that fail provide limited evidence to support their conclusions or arguments. Okay, so make sure that you make the most of the evidence in your portfolio. Make sure the citations you use are accurate and match up with the arguments that you're making, or back up what you're saying. Make sure that you're accurately evidencing your portfolio. And there needs to be more of you need an equal emphasis on each of the 5 GSP domains as much as possible. There might be some that, particularly the leadership one, that might not be as heavily evidenced as the others. But overall, there needs to be as equal as possible across the 5 GSP domains. Okay. And those that fail propose little or no evidence of the now what. So that analytical part, that forward thinking, how is this going to influence my practice in the future? How am I planning to develop further? So in summary then, follow the guidelines for completion, which we've mentioned already. So I'll go to that. So the guidance, the submission template, the marking criteria. Plan the narrative. Now, to plan that narrative, you can use the template, as was mentioned here, that submission template. But also you can look at using the model of reflection that we're using, so the what, the now, the so what, the now what. So you could use that as part of your plan to make sure that you are emphasising the now what and not just the descriptive element of it. But remember, when you submit your narrative, that it needs to be written as a narrative, not with lots of headings in terms of now what, so what, and now what. It needs to be written as a continuous narrative. But look at the examples on the website if you're unsure. You need to evidence the narrative. So as we've already mentioned, you need to make sure that you've got that evidence in your portfolio. And if I just go back to that one, just to also remind you with that, in terms of the evidence, that it needs to meet those 5 domains of good scientific practice and be written out, signposted as such. Okay. And then finally, it needs to be critically reflective. So it needs to follow this model that we've talked about, the Driscoll model, the what, the so what, and now what rather, and not to be overly reliant on this what, this description. We need to demonstrate this deeper analytical thinking in terms of the so what and the now what. So how are you going to fill the gaps in your knowledge or practice? How are you going to develop your knowledge further? And if it helps, you could look at it in terms of this. So this is the what, is the description, this is the reflection, and this is being critically reflective. So my final comment would be is to get support from your training officer or other colleagues. Discuss your narrative with your training officer. They have been supporting you throughout the programme, and they discuss the evidence that you're going to use to support each of the domains, and they might actually suggest, help you pick out the best evidence that can help demonstrate that you're ready to practice. Because, sometimes we need that critical eye in order to support us in making the most of ourselves and developing fully. And on that note, it would be really, you might find that it's really beneficial also as part of your narrative is to refer to feedback that you've had from other people and how you've used that feedback, or how you're going to use that feedback in the future and how it's going to influence you. So there's a wealth of evidence in your portfolio for you to demonstrate your readiness to practice as part of this narrative. So thank you very much. Remember to look at the guidance on the website. Guidance around writing the AYAC narrative will be on there and will reflect what I have talked about in this short presentation. So good luck and all the best.